my great pleasure to moderate today's discussion of the personal impact of international travel, and in the case of one of my guests, international travel connected to immigration. Stephanie, to my right here, Chance, I told you I'd muck it up, of the Workforce Education Department here at the college, had the opportunity to travel to Kenya for about 3 weeks in 2012. This was her first overseas travel, her first experience in Africa. She went thinking mostly about the game reserves that she would be visiting, but soon after arriving in Kenya, she realized she was going to experience much more as she passed through villages, visited schools, and met Kenyans. In the case of Zimzim New, to my left, a Shoreline student, she was younger, about 13, and traveling in the opposite direction from Kenya to the United States. Zimzim was not just visiting, although she may have felt that way at first, but was immigrating with her family. When they first arrived, they lived in Georgia for 6 months, then Minnesota for a year. Eventually, they opted for someplace not too hot, not too cold, and they moved to Seattle. That was in 2008. Zimzim completed her high school education here in Seattle and then enrolled at Shoreline Community College, where she's studying social work. She had the opportunity to return to Kenya during the 2013-2014 academic year, but this time she returned as a citizen of the United States. She has joint U.S. and Kenyan citizenship. So she had the opportunity not only to experience immigrating to the U.S., which we'll talk about, but also visiting the country of her birth. This time, if not as an outsider, at least as someone experiencing Kenya in a unique sort of way. In my early conversations with both Stephanie and Zimzim, the term transformative came up when talking about the impact of the experiences. Visiting Kenya, immigrating from Kenya to the United States, revisiting Kenya as someone familiar with that culture but having been away from it for about 6 or 7 years, hence the word transformative in the title of this event. I don't want to be too dramatic about the personal effects of these experiences, but anyone who has spent time in another culture understands, even if it's just for a short time, understands how transformative that experience can be. So maybe not at the time and place where it's happening, but at some point you become aware of when you return to your place of origin. You become aware of just how transformative it was. So it's just not the same. So what we're going to do here is have a brief conversation. I've got some questions I'm going to ask them, and I'm going to really give them the floor to talk about their experiences. And then we'll talk like that for about 20 minutes, and then we want to take questions from you, the audience. So let's get on with it. Let's get started. My first question is really to both of you, and maybe Stephanie can go first. What do you recall? The question is, what do you recall of your first impressions of your journey? In the case of Stephanie, this was visiting Kenya. In the case of Zimzim, this was immigrating to the U.S. And perhaps in answering, you can provide a little bit of context so that folks can understand the point of your journey. That is the where, the when, the how, the why, whatever you want as part of your remarks.
Okay, so I traveled to Kenya a couple years ago on a safari trip. I was really excited about seeing African wildlife out on safari. So that was the reason for my trip initially. And I went into the trip, like Larry said, pretty focused on all the animals I was going to see and all the amazing photographs I was going to get and all that kind of stuff. And I quickly became sort of surprised at how much I was connecting with the people that I was meeting there and how much I was learning about the culture and how fascinating it was. So some impressions. Well, I guess I expected it to be more primitive than it was, so I was surprised to find out that people had TVs in their houses and they had Facebook pages and stuff like that. So I felt a little silly in thinking it was going to be this primitive setting when really, in a lot of ways, it was very similar to life here. So that was one big thing that surprised me. And what else? Some of the cultural differences in gender roles were kind of surprising. It was surprising to learn that the group that I were with, they were from the Maasai culture, and that they didn't have divorce at all in their culture, and it was pretty common for men to have 2 wives. So it was interesting to hear what that was like, living, juggling 2 wives, 2 families, and supporting both of them. So yeah.
Okay. Zimzim, can you talk a little bit about what it was like when you came to the U.S.? I know that was a long time ago, but
When I first came to the US, I thought, wow, I'm here, and no more whipping for me from the teachers, because back in Kenya, we get like whipped by teachers if we do a mistake, or if you get it depends with how many wrongs you get in your test, so you get whipped for that. And I was away from that, so I was so glad. But we moved to Georgia, and it didn't feel like I was in America, because Georgia is a segregated state, so I saw most of African descent, and I asked my dad a question like, "Are you sure we're in America?" Because I only see Africans. I thought I would see more like white people, and when we stayed 6 months in Georgia, and then we moved to Minnesota, and we lived in a country place, and so my school was populated with white population, and I was like, I think now I'm in America. And yeah, that was my experience in coming to, and then we moved to Seattle again, and it felt like home because of the weather.
what do you mean the weather?
Uh,
Gray skies?
Yeah, well, the weather, like the place I lived in Kenya, it was kind of like rainy, and the weather was similar to Seattle, so that's how I felt like it was home, because it was rainy and pretty like fair weather.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Zimzim, my question's here for you. What was it like? You returned to Kenya about a year ago, and you were there for about a year, and if I recall, you said you were doing some volunteer work. So what was it like to return to Kenya after having been gone for several years? And this time you were going back kind of almost as a visitor.
I felt like I didn't fit in. I couldn't have a conversation with people easily, because they could tell from my different accent. Well, my accent changed. I spoke like a broken Swahili, which is a language in Kenya, and people will just start laughing at me, and they will know from that step they will know I'm from outside. So a lot of things changed. The country became developed, and we have like, I can easily get internet access in buses, in basically everywhere I could get internet access. So that was something amazing, that like a 5 hours drive to a different city, I could get internet access full time. So that was something that I was like really excited about. And I visited a school in Isiolo School of the Deaf. It's a small school, and it's a boarding school. So I visited that. You could see pictures of students over there, and those students really touched me, because they were really happy.
Right in the middle.
Yeah, and yeah, even though they came from our like a poor family members, they were still happy, and they touched me, and I would like to go back and visit them again.
Okay, Stephanie, what stands out in your memory about commerce? I remember when we first started talking, you were talking about going through the villages and the way that business was done, the way that buying and selling was done. That's what I mean by commerce.
Right. So, yeah, I had sort of a interesting, surprising experience when we went shopping for some souvenirs while I was in Kenya. So we went to this little place with a bunch of little stores there, all open air market kind of stuff. And people were sort of running up to our vehicle and trying to say, come to my store first, come check out my stuff first. And it was interesting because there were no prices on anything, so I was trying to find out how much is this stuff, do I want to buy it or not. And I learned that there was this whole sort of game to figuring out prices and buying stuff. So they would say, oh, I don't want to tell you the price yet, or the price is a secret. Come into the back of the store and I'll write the price down, and then we can negotiate. And they were trying to get me to stay in their store and look at more stuff, and they didn't want other people to hear what the price was. So I was kind of thrown off guard. It was, unusual. And then also, if I decided not to buy something, some of them would actually chase me outside over to our vehicle when we were leaving and, offer me a better price. You don't like that price? I'll give it to you for this. I'll give it to you for this. So it was really a whole experience. It was very different from just walking into a store here and seeing the price and taking it up to the cash register and buying it. So it was a little bit exhausting, but definitely made for an interesting story.
Can you imagine if anyone in the audience has a part-time job at, say, JCPenney's or Sears? Can you imagine saying to the customer, would you come in the back and I'll write down the price and tell you about it, or chasing them out in the parking lot to offer them a better price? Yeah, that's a bit of an eye-opening thing. So I guess this question also is for both of you, and I know you've talked about some of the similarities and differences, things that struck you, but other things that you haven't talked about that you want to mention in terms of what stands out, the takeaways, if you think back now, today, several years later, what are the things that stand out as far as being similar and differences between Kenya and the United States? And I'm talking about the culture, the society, business, education. I made a note, by the way, of this whipping. As an instructor, I'll have to kind of keep track of that.
One of the differences is the school system. And Kenya is a third world country, so there's a lot of poverty going on, and the school system is really poor. And this is, from my experience, with deaf school, it's like a boarding school, and at the same time it's a public school, so the government should be funding the school, but which they don't usually fund the school, so the teachers will provide money for the students through their pocket money. That was something interesting. And those students, usually we have like a big test during 8th grade, so you could go to high school, and if you fail the test, like there's no high school accepting you. And the students, the deaf students struggle to get a like A, because for them they have to get an A. But like for hearing school, it's okay for them to get a C and they could get into a high school. So that was something that was really difficult for me to understand. And similarities, I could find like when I go to the capital state, I could find like Starbucks. I could find most of the things that are in the U.S. Choose.
Stephanie, anything jump out?
Well, I also had the opportunity to visit a school pretty close to where Zimzim was, and it was really an impactful experience. A lot of the students, you could tell they were pretty poor. Some of their shoes, were falling apart and stuff like that. And their school was an open-air building with basically a chalkboard and some desks, but I didn't see any books, no computers, so they didn't have a whole lot to work with. And it was just really cool to connect with the students, and they were all crowded around us, and they loved seeing their pictures, so we would take pictures of them and then show them their pictures on the digital camera, and they just loved that. They were all jumping into the picture, take my picture. But we took turns sort of going back and forth asking questions. The students at the elementary school asked questions of us. And it was funny because one of the questions, they wanted to know who our president was. And then when we said Obama, they all cheered because he's Kenya. So they all knew the answer, but they just wanted us to hear. They just wanted us to say, yes, our president is Obama. And so they were so proud. That was cute. But that was a humbling experience being at that school and seeing how little the children had and what little opportunities they had in that community. So it made me really thankful to have been born into a family and able to go to school and have food and clothes and everything I need and not have to worry about that. So that was one striking thing about being there. And then the people were really friendly and nice and welcoming. I stayed at a sanctuary for animals, for rhinos and other animals there, and got to know some of the staff members. And so they were really friendly and were telling us about their culture and rituals for coming of age for teenage boys and girls and stuff like that. But it was a little surprising and sad to hear that some of them had taken these jobs hours away from their families in order to support their children. So they wouldn't be able to see their children maybe except for weekends or every couple of weeks in order to provide for their families.
Okay. Simpson, do you want to say a little bit more about the school where you volunteered, what you did there? And could you just said something a moment ago about the students from that school actually had to score higher to get into high school? That's kind of surprises me.
Yeah, it was really surprising to me when I heard about that, because like out of like they will have like their 8th grade population would be like 8 students, and like out of those 8 students, 2 or 3 will get to go to high school because they got our 8th grade, and which but like people worked hard to like high school education is not free in Kenya, only until 8th grade is free. So they will pay for their school fees. So they will get like sponsor for those 3 students who have 8th grade, and the other ones will they don't get to go to high school at all.
Interesting. Okay. How about are there any questions out in the audience? Let's take some questions from the audience. But one thing is, because we are recording this event, if you have a question, we ask that you would please use a microphone, and Tree is going to run around with a cordless microphone, which means he's going to take yours away, and we have to share microphones. And so, question back there? I got a feeling the questions are going to be for you, not for me.
Hello. Yeah, I was really kind of curious because you say like out of the 8, 3 go to college. So what's the fate of the other students who are not college or high school? What is the fate of the other students who don't go to high school? Where do they tend to end up in terms of society and their life's career?
They usually just stay home, I think, and it's the government that made this standard for them. So I think it's pretty like really bad. I want to go back, and I think like they should change that system, because like no child left behind should be the policy, and I think they should be using that. So I think pretty much their life is ended after they finish 8th grade. So yeah, it's pretty sad.
Other questions? Oh, come on, don't be shy.
So that you have mentioned that if you want to go to the school in Kenya, that you need to afford most of the tuition. So that, in my view, I think the government didn't really provide much incentive for students to go to school. And I would like to know if there are any private corporation or like organization will have some scholarships or different kind of thing to provide some incentive for those students that really want to go to school.
Yeah. Usually it's the private organization that provide like we have the UN providing for them, but mostly I have one of the students who's sponsored by my aunt, so she pays for his tuition, and the other student is the chief government pays for their tuition, which is in around the city. And so, but like teachers are the one who go to ask for the funding.
And I would add, I also heard about students getting sponsored. So I ran into some students who found people who were able to help them pay for high school or even college by sponsoring them. So some of the students I met when we were at that school, I realized later, I think they saw me as a potential sponsor, so they were coming up and saying, "My name is so-and-so, my name is so-and-so, don't forget about me." And at the time, I just, thought, oh, they're children, they're being friendly, whatever. And then later, I kind of realized that maybe they were hoping that one of us on the trip would be sponsor material.
So was this a private school or a public school, if there is such a distinction?
It was a public school.
Yours was public.
Yeah.
I'm not
What
sure.
about the one that you visited?
I don't know.
Does the distinction mean the same in Kenya as it does here? The distinction between
There's
public and private?
Yeah, there's like public school until there's public school until 8th grade, and then from high school there's no like it's all private school. You have to pay tuition for it. It's still a government school, but you have to pay tuition for it.
So there's no free education that ends at high school, whereas here,
Yeah.
you start paying for education in college, but high school is free unless you choose to go to private school.
High school is not free.
But it's not free,
Yeah.
right? Okay. Other questions out there?
You had said that you had spent some time at a deaf school. Are you like currently furthering your education in sign language, or what efforts are you seeing that are being made for their case?
When I first started college, I was going for mental health in social worker, but now I'll be focusing in all kind of different disabilities, and so I think that will something that I'll be doing too.
I also have a question about the deaf school. In the United States, I think there's a big deaf community of students that go to special schools, and they speak American Sign Language. And I'm wondering, do you know what deaf students speak in Kenya?
They speak British Sign Language. Yeah. So,
Thank you.
yeah.
Kenya was a British colony for quite a few years. I think, what year it got its independence?
Yeah.
64, I believe. But it still has strong connections to Great Britain. Other questions out there? He's coming. You're allowed to ask more than one question.
This one's more geared towards Stephanie. You had said that you spent some time at an animal sanctuary, and I was wondering if you had done that in the U.S. and if you saw a big comparison between those two.
So the main sanctuary I know about in the U.S. would be, it's actually in Ellensburg in central Washington for chimpanzees who know sign language, speaking of sign language. So I spent a summer there. And it was quite different there. I don't know that that one is representative of others in the U.S. because it's very limited as far as, it's associated with the university, and you have to make an appointment to come and see the chimpanzees, and so they're really respectful of the chimpanzees as being their home, and that kind of stuff. The sanctuary I went to in Kenya is called Lewa, and it's awesome, if anybody has a chance to go. And so it was such a cool experience. We got to drive around in basically open air Jeeps and see cheetahs and elephants and zebras and giraffes and a million different kinds of birds just doing their thing out in nature. So it was really cool to be able to see all that and see them hunting and see them mating, and I can't imagine a sanctuary like that in the United States.
I was just wondering about funding for the kids' education, because you keep saying that it costs money. Do they have to do they have jobs for themselves when they're in 8th grade, or how do they afford it?
Yeah, for the education, it's actually not even easy to get a job when you finish universities. So there wouldn't be jobs for 8th grades, but they will have sponsors from small organization, or other teachers will sponsor students. So it's pretty cool how teachers get to sponsor kids too. So they work really hard to to see the success of these students. And my mom is actually a principal at the School of the Deaf. That's how I got connected with them. And she sponsored one of the kids, and right now she graduated from high school and she's going to college. And the gift she got from my parent was like a land, but she wasn't accepting a gift, so she paid for the student school since like she started school until she finished it. So.
How did you get the sponsors to go back to Kenya?
How did I get the sponsor to go back to Kenya?
Yeah.
Oh, well, I paid for myself and went back there.
So what made you to go back there as a volunteer?
What made me go back there? When I was growing up, I grew up with students of the deaf. Like it's a boarding school, and some students, their parents wouldn't come pick them up when the school closed, and so like they will come and live with us until the parents will show up. And so that's how like I went to volunteer, because growing up I had connection with them, and I still have that connection.
So are you gonna go back there to teach the deaf kids, or are you just gonna stay here and?
I actually want to go back. I'll be going back in June again. I will go volunteer, as well as try to write letters to the government to change the system of like how they have to get an A in there when they finish middle school.
Hi, I just wonder, do you still have connection with your friends in Kenya? I mean, like, do they go to college, and how's their life? And then, like, once, I mean, like, where's the teen? I mean, the adult, the young adult, already graduate from the university in Kenya. I mean, like, how they get a job, and then like, how's their employment? And I'm just curious about that.
Pretty much the Kenya system works with connection. So I went to a private school when I was in Kenya, and most of the students that I went to school with go to universities, and most of them work, so they have connections with other people, I guess.
And the people that I met that had jobs, those were very coveted jobs that they were, they considered themselves lucky to be able to get those jobs working at this sanctuary and helping visitors out and stuff like that. And unfortunately, there's a big trade in rhino horn and elephant tusks and things like that. And so some people, if they're unable to provide for their family in other ways, they might be tempted to kill rhinos or elephants in order to sell their horns and tusks, because they can make so much money doing that. So part of the people that I got to meet, they were on a team of people helping to protect the animals in the preserve, and making sure they didn't get poached. So we got to see the team of bloodhounds that they had who would go out and track and stuff like that. So that was, it's easy to say sitting in Seattle, Washington, the United States, oh, you just shouldn't kill animals. So I sort of got a broader perspective of it being there, how, just how complicated the issue is. I guess it's not as simple as I had thought before.
Okay. So in one of my classes, we learned that in Kenya, they normally have, like, you have your name, and then there's a tribal name, and then you identify yourself as Kenyan and African.
Yeah.
Did you have a tribal name, or is your family part of?
There's like 55 tribes in Kenya, but actually my nationality is Somalian, we migrated to Kenya.
Okay. And what did your parents do for work that enabled you to be able to have what you needed to move to America?
My dad travels around, so he does business, and my mom is a teacher.
And they both went to high school?
Yeah.
Did they go any further than high school?
They went to universities, both of them.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, I was about 10 minutes late, so you might have talked about this, but I was wondering, because I know, Zamzam, when you were in Kenya before, there was a lot of problems with for Somalians traveling around, and I wonder, have you heard if it has improved any or gotten any worse? If you have you talked about that already? No, that might be something you might want to share about that too, if you want to.
There's Somalians who immigrated right now, and there's Somalians who immigrated with the British colonies. So for me, my great-great-grandfather came with the British colonies, and like right now they can't tell the difference of our Somali Kenyan and our Somalia from Somalia. So we've been discriminated. Yeah.
Was that your question? I'm not sure. Well, try it again. Sorry, you lost the mic. He'll come back to you.
No, I was just wondering if, because I know you were saying there were a lot of incidences that were occurring at the time in terms of crime and discrimination and stuff like that, and I just wondered, has it improved any? Has anything changed since you were there last, before?
I don't think it has improved. There's still issues going on, and I think they're attacking each other, but there's still conflict going on. Both groups are attacking each other.
I just kind of want to follow up on her question, but I know this is like a really complicated issue, and I was just wondering, like power, like the families that have a lot of land, I know they get a little bit more opportunity. I was just wondering, what is happening to provide opportunity for the people who maybe can get those grades but can't afford the money, can't get the sponsors?
These small organizations which try to change, create a better life for students who cannot afford and family members who cannot afford education. But then the government is still increasing the economic life, things are really expensive there. And so even food quality is expensive. And sometimes these family members who don't have food, they go without food, or there's a lot of poverty going around right now.
Why don't you just give her a mic?
This is also for Stephanie. I'm just reading your little bio, and at the end you said your trip was full of a lot of aha moments, and I know you've touched on a few of those, but I was wondering if there are any key aspects that you wanted to elaborate on.
Sure. Couple other things that come to mind, one of the transformative aspects of the trip was coming home and seeing all my stuff, all my clothes and all my possessions, and I just have so much stuff. And just thinking about how I don't need all this stuff. So it sort of gave me a different mindset as far as, shopping for new clothes and stuff like that. What else?
Did you barter?
I did enjoy the bartering in the marketplace, getting a better deal for stuff, yeah. Other aha moments.
I'm just thinking, I was sitting here, a lot of the questions have been coming to Zimzim, and they're kind of questions that you almost have to be familiar at a different level with the culture to respond to. And I'm wondering, in her responses and the questions, did that provoke any? Oh, I hadn't thought about that. I mean, do you feel like you had kind of you were able to, in the short time you were there, and I knew you were there kind of as a tourist, but you visited some areas. Did you feel like you gained some insights into how those societies function, or are you just a kind of a tourist dollar?
A little bit. I mean, it feels like I just sort of scratched the surface with that kind of stuff. And I just, was with one area and one tribe. But as far as like the crime and stuff, somebody was asking about the crime. One part of our trip did have to be canceled or detoured because of some crime going on. Some tourists had gotten held up at gunpoint. So it definitely touched us while we were there. We weren't able to go to the one game preserve because of that.
You also mentioned about learning of some like rites of passage, like becoming an adult, I would assume. Can you tell us about those?
Okay, I'll have to search my memory here. So I remember there was a different one for young men and for young women. And for the women, I believe it was a form of like genital mutilation, which I was kind of cringing to hear that. But it seemed very, this is just the way it is and everybody's fine with it, and it's like something to sort of look forward to and be proud of when you've reached that coming of age. For the boys, I forget what it was. Do you know, Simpson? Yeah. But I remember them talking about, even though it was painful, it was a really big deal not to cry. And you were supposed to, act very manly and not act like it hurt. And so I remember them stressing that no matter what, you're supposed to be like, oh, this is fine, no problem.
Do you know if the wealthier people also have these traditions, that they still do this, or if this is just...
For the women, they're kind of like fighting right now, so it's for the women's, it's like right now there's like a fighting going on, so like the government is trying to stop that kind of situation to go on. So there's a lot of like chiefs who have been prisoned because of that.
Thank you.
So I would like to know, are there any Asian people or people from other country like doing different kind of business in Kenya, and what kind of business are those? Like opening a grocery store or some kind like that?
Have you seen them? Like different people from different places?
I know the one road that we had driven on, because a lot of the roads we were in inside the sanctuary were very, very bumpy, no concrete, just kind of rocks and dirt and stuff. And then when we came out of the sanctuary, there was like more of a paved road, a couple lanes wide. And they had said something about some Chinese businessmen had paid for that road related to business going on, but they didn't really give us too many details there.
I have seen a lot of Asians, white population. I've seen like a lot of people from different countries, and I've had conversation with them. Not only in one place, not even the capital city, but in different places, even the countryside I have traveled to. I've seen a lot of people from different race and like from different backgrounds.
Earlier you talked about you writing letters and different kind of stuff to the government to help out with the kids with the school. If the government has not done so much for the people till now, what difference would your letters and your support would make for the government doing anything?
Sorry. I wanted to actually, I talked to this to one of my professor, Miss Duval. She's actually here today. She's gonna be the one who's helping me to write these letters, and we're not gonna be writing it to the government. We're gonna be writing it to the UN, and so they could help us with the situation.
What situation is that?
One of the things that I want to really focus it with is differently able, and so like I want that system to change of people in Kenya who are differently able, and they're going through a lot of like I wouldn't say oppression, but I would say unjust ways that the government controls the way of their lives.
Both of you have talked about, in other meetings, not just here today, but talked about the opportunities to maybe travel back to Kenya. And you alluded to going back to Kenya, but I'm wondering if you can talk in any more specificity. I guess, why do you want to travel back to Kenya, and what do you think would be different than your previous travel?
So within a couple days of being there, I already decided, I have to come back here. This is so amazing. It's such a rich experience, as far as even just the wildlife. So being able to see up close all these species that before I'd only seen in books or TV or whatever. So as far as what would be different when I go back, it unfortunately seems like the poaching is not getting any better. You keep hearing about we're down to this number of these animals and this number of those animals. So that might be one thing that would be different when I went back. It might be an even more dire situation. What was the other part of the question?
I was just wondering why you wanted to go back.
It was just such a rich experience, so amazing, and I just, why not? It was awesome.
It's like, let's say you visit a place and you just feel so connected with that place, and that's how I feel about Kenya. I feel so connected, and there's a lot of things which are amazing about it, and there's a lot of things which it seems not right when you understand about it. The wild animals that Stephanie visited, she had like a lot of amazing pictures, and that's why I want to go see the animals too, and at the same time I want to change some things that's going on in my country, I will say, yeah.
Hi, I just thought the last thing you said was really interesting, because when you said I'd like to see the animals too, it just dawned on me that tourists go over there and we go to see them, and we just assume that everybody in Kenya sees the animals all the time, but it's really not a part of your everyday life, is it? Yeah, interesting.
This is for both of you. Technically, I'm not born here. I was born in Ethiopia. And so the school was bad there, and you literally don't learn that much. So if you were to go back there and to help out the kids or the family, it is, instead of taking money or clothes and stuff like that, you should actually take school supplies, and you would see that real difference that you would make in their lives than if you were to give them just regular money to help them out with the regular lives, and that's just it.
That was part of our trip to the school, is that ahead of time, our whole group, I think there was about 24 of us or something like that, we all brought school supplies to bring to the school, so yeah.
I think a lot of tourists, when they go back to Kenya, they visit schools, and I've seen a lot of pictures with tourists who come and bring things to the school, like books, pens, and supplies. They have a lot of donations from foreign countries.
There's a question up here in the front.
I was just wondering, Stephanie, did you feel any like pressure to sponsor kids when you were there, or like sponsor the schools and stuff?
It was a pretty short visit. We were at the school for maybe 2 hours. So I think if it was a longer visit and if I was around them more, maybe I would have. One part of the trip that was awkward for me was being in this sanctuary with these staff members sort of waiting on us hand and foot. And, in the United States, I'm not like upper class or anything like that, so I'm not used to that. And so it made me feel like uncomfortable. I wanted to be like, well, no, I'll go grab you a drink, or I'll go grab your food or whatever. So that I kind of felt this like sort of class difference, and that was uncomfortable.
Oh, I just want to ask that the life expectancy there is 57 and 59, which is relatively low comparing to other countries. So can I have what factors affect that? Like, what's the health systems like over there?
You can say, I don't know.
I think there's a lot of health issues going on, like HIV, TB, malaria. There's a lot of like health situation, but the government has actually provided medication for that. So there's like TB medication, HIV medication, which are actually free. And so they have tried to change that.
Hi, I'm just wondering about how the economic system in Kenya look like. Like, do they what kind of goods they try to export from to another country, and what kind of goods they want to import in Kenya to help the people, and what is the best service except the tourism? What is the best service in Kenya?
Kenya is it's a corrupted country, so they have a lot of issues with economic, but they usually export coffee, and they try to import a lot of things that they export, which that's why the economic is not good right now. It was a developing country, but now I will say it's not a developing country anymore because of the leaders that we have. They become a leader because of their tribe instead of trying to support their country. So tribalism is the issue, and I think they should export more than they import into the country. Have I answered your question?
We're near the end of our time, so we do need to stop. But I hope that everyone here has enjoyed the conversation, and I hope that everyone here will join me in giving a round of applause to Stephanie and Zimzum for sharing their thoughts, their experiences.